Welcome to episode 156 of the Whole Circle podcast. And today we're talking to Dr. Glenn Livingston about binge eating.
Welcome to the Whole Circle podcast, a show about health, wellness, food and fun. So join us, Tracy and Joe, as we interview some of the world's most amazing health and wellness experts and find out how to live your best life ever. It's going to be a whole lot of fun, so sit back and enjoy the show.
So Dr. Livingston is a psychologist. 17 of them in his family.
I know, that did make us chuckle.
His mum, his dad, his family, siblings. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. So great episode. Absolutely great episode. Got a lot out of it. It's one you're going to have to probably listen to again and get your notepad and pen out as well, because there was heaps and heaps of information.
Absolutely. So we cover things like why people do eat emotionally, how to stop eating, binge eating, and he talks about his pig in his brain. But I kept thinking back to that episode we did with Melissa Ambrosini and Your Mean Girl. So if you've listened to that episode, you know what I'm talking about. The little person inside your head that tells you you're not worthy, or tells you that you can't do it, or tells you that, you know, the negative things all the time. That little person, I now always say my mean girl, but he called it his pig in his brain that told him the negative things. And no, you should have that chocolate, and anyway, so I found that really interesting that he sort of had a similar thing going on there.
Yeah, so, when the pig was going, I need chocolate, you're going, well, sorry, pig, you're missing out.
Yeah, so he had his boundaries. He talks about that, how to have boundaries around your food. So if you do have issues with having too much of a certain thing, he talked about alcohol and sugar and what was the other one? Alcohol, sugar, and there were three. No, I can't think.
Flour.
Like breads and flours, which are the three things that I would binge on, not alcohol, but chocolate definitely over the years. So
sugar, sugar for you, but it's very much more flour based for me. It's very much more flour based for me.
So definitely, if you have anything like that going on, or it's definitely worth listening to this episode because it was really interesting.
I could eat a whole batch of scrolls.
I could eat a whole block of chocolate.
I couldn't do a whole block. But man, if I make some scrolls, I'm like, so yum, so yum. All right, so all the show notes to this episode are found on our website, additive-freelifestyle.com/podcast156. So that's additive-freelifestyle.com/podcast156. Yep. Now, Dr. Livingston has got he's a bestseller author. He has written the book, Never Binge Again. Never Binge Again. Thank you, Tracy. He also has on his website, which is linked into our show notes, he has on our website some free downloadables and the book, which you can download for free when you go to his website and sign up. So that's pretty generous.
Yeah, very. So go check it out. Episode 156. All the show notes, like we said, are there. Also, make sure you follow us on all our social platforms as well, and come and check us out in Instagram. We have a bit too much fun sometimes in our Insta stories. Yep. And, of course, Facebook. And if you're not on our email list, then you best get on there so that you don't miss any type of promotional thing or any type of recipe or anything that we're giving away for free ourselves or anything at all, pretty much.
Yeah, and make sure you hit that subscribe button, whether you're listening on iTunes, hit the subscribe, or whether you're watching this in YouTube, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes that we release. And please leave us a comment below and leave us a review. This is a really, really great episode. So sit back and enjoy. And thanks for being here.
Hi, Glenn. Welcome to our show.
Hey. I'm very happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this all week.
Yeah, thank you. All right. For our audience, let everybody know who you are and what led you to write the book, Never Binge Again.
Well, according to my mom, my name is Dr. Glenn Livingston. And I'm a psychologist by training from a family of 17 therapists. So my mom and my dad and my aunts and my uncle and my sister and my cousins and my grandmother and my great uncles and great aunts, all of them are psychotherapists in one form or another. And the standing joke in the house is, if something breaks, we all know how to ask it how it feels, but nobody knows how to fix it.
Yeah, I was about to say, your dinner time conversations, like everyone would say, so how does that make you feel?
Oh my God. Kill me now. Kill me now. But honestly, that's all I ever wanted to do. From the time I was little and I heard my dad on the radio, and I asked my mom why he was on the radio. She said, well, because he's a psychologist. I said, what's that? She said, he makes people happy when they're sad. And I said, I want to do that. Why does he do it on the radio? Well, he makes more people happy when they're sad. I said, I want to do that. So that's been the thrust of my life's work, is to help make people happy when they're sad. It's not that simple, but that's what I do. I do specialize in working with people with eating troubles now, not just people with formal binge eating disorder, but people that struggle with overeating and constantly changing their mind about food and going beyond their own best judgment. I do that in a coaching framework rather than a treatment framework, because some of the things that I do are a little unorthodox and not necessarily in concert with the best practices of my profession. So I'll say that up front, that I'm offering this as coaching and education, just as a legal disclaimer. Although the research is now starting to come around to support what I'm doing, which is very interesting. Anyway, I am not just someone who decided to work with eating troubled clients. I had very serious troubles myself. I'm 6'4", I'm reasonably muscular, just genetically, and when I was a kid, around 16, 17 years old, I figured out that if I worked out for 2 or 3 hours a day, I could eat whatever I wanted to. 6,000, 7,000 calories a day, whole pizzas, boxes of muffins, boxes of chocolate bars, boxes of munchkins, whatever you could imagine, I was eating it. And I loved it. I did not think this was a problem. I thought, this is great. I was spending an awful lot of time eating, spending an awful lot of time recovering from food, and an awful lot of time exercising. But I was 17, who cared, right? When I got to be 22 or 23 years old and I got married, I had responsibilities. I had patients. I was commuting 2 hours a day each way. And I couldn't work out like that. If I could work out 2 hours a week, I was lucky. But I couldn't stop eating the way I was eating either. It's like these foods had a life of their own. And I was eating, and I was obsessing about them. I'd be I remember sitting with a suicidal patient and thinking, when can I get a pizza? And that really bothered me because, like I said, it's always been most important to me to be a great psychologist. And thank God I never lost anybody. I worked with a lot of suicidal people. I never lost anyone. But it was miserable, a particular type of torture for me. Like, the mental obsession was actually worse than all the weight that I gained, and I did gain weight. I got to be about 257, 260 pounds on the scale before I stopped weighing myself. It was probably up to about 280 at my top. I'm between 200 and 210 most of the time now. And being from a family of psychologists, I recognized this was a serious problem. But I thought it stemmed from a hole in my heart. I figured that if I could heal what was going on in my heart, then and figure out what was ailing me psychologically, then I wouldn't have the cravings. From the theory, it's not what you're eating, it's what's eating you. So I went to all the best doctors, and you can imagine that my family knew them. This is the first time I think I'm talking to two women looking at me. It's kind of funny. So I went to all the best doctors. I saw psychologists, I saw psychiatrists. I went to Overeaters Anonymous for years. I took medication. I did everything you could imagine. And it was a very soulful journey. I learned a lot about myself that had a big impact on who I am today. I don't regret it. I think it was worthwhile taking the journey, but it didn't fix the food problem. I would get a little better and then a lot worse, and then a little better and a lot worse. Finally, there were 3 things that happened that flipped my paradigm about food. One was that I don't have children and I wasn't commuting. And my ex-wife, she was traveling, we were married at the time, she was traveling a lot for business. So I had a lot of time. And I had a second career doing consulting for very large companies, Fortune 500 companies, a lot of names you'd recognize, a lot of them in the food industry. And I started to realize that they were spending billions of dollars to engineer these hyper-palatable food-like things. Like there were concentrations of starch and sugar and fat and oil and excitotoxins and salt, and they were designed to hit our bliss point without giving us the nutrition to feel satisfied. And there's a part of me that was going, that's just not right. It's not right what's going on. And that's why these foods have a life of their own. That's why I'm looking for love at the bottom of a bag or a box or a container. It's not necessarily that my mother didn't love me enough when I was little. It's that these foods have a life of their own. Mm-hmm. The second thing that happened was that I was reading a book called Rational Recovery by Jack Trimpey, and he works with mostly drug and alcohol addictions. And he pointed out to me, in not so many words, that the seat of addiction is the lizard brain. And it's the base of your skull, it's the midbrain, it's the most primitive part of our being. And that part of our being doesn't really know love. We like to think that love existed from the very beginning, but if you look at evolutionary history, it didn't really. When we were reptiles, or when there were no people and we were evolving from reptiles, it doesn't matter if you believe in evolution or not, because this whole thing evolves to a place where it could be that God put it there, it doesn't matter. But the lizard doesn't know love when it sees something in the environment. It knows, do I eat it? Do I mate with it? Or do I kill it? Eat, mate, or kill. There's no concern for tribe or family. There's no spirituality or music or art or creativity or contribution to society. There's certainly no long-term strategic plans like diet and weight loss. It's just eat, mate, or kill. And I said, well, so why am I trying to love myself thin if the part of me that's addicted doesn't really know love? It was very interesting. Mm-hmm. The last thing that happened was I did a big study for myself. I got 40,000 people over the course of many years when internet clicks were cheap to take a survey. And I asked them what foods they struggled with, and I asked them what was going on in their lives. And I found three really interesting things. People that struggle with chocolate like me, my binges usually started with chocolate, they tended to be lonely or brokenhearted. And I was in a bad marriage, so it kind of made sense. I'll tell you a little bit more about where I went with that afterwards. People who struggled with crunchy, salty things tended to be stressed at work. And people who struggled with starchy, soft things like bread and bagels or maybe pasta, they tended to be stressed at home. And I thought this was really interesting, right? I got a lot of publicity for that, but it didn't solve the problem. I'll tell you a story so you understand why it didn't solve the problem, and then I'll pause because I'm not letting you guys talk. But when I found out that people who struggle with chocolate tended to be lonely or brokenhearted, I asked my mom. I said, Mom, you know what's going on in the marriage. I'm not really happy, but that can't be the whole thing. What happened in my upbringing that would have set up this pattern that I run to chocolate when I feel lonely or brokenhearted? And she gets this horrible look on her face, and she goes, I'm so sorry. And I go, what? She goes, I'm so sorry, honey. She says, but when you were about 1 year old, my dad just got out of prison, her dad, my grandfather. And she had adored and idolized this man, and she oriented her whole life around him, and he was guilty, and her life fell apart. And so she was very depressed and anxious a lot of the time, and she would just be sitting and staring at the wall. At the same time, my dad, her husband, was a captain in the army, and they were talking about sending him to Vietnam. This was 1965. And so she was terrified that she was going to be a single mother. She had another kid on the way soon. And she didn't have the wherewithal to hug me or love me or feed me the right things when I came running to her at 1 year old. So 1 year old. And so what she did is she put a refrigerator on the floor, and she put a big bottle of chocolate Bosco syrup. You guys don't remember that, right? Chocolate Bosco syrup? Not really.
It's just like a chocolate syrup that you pour on ice cream
Yeah, it was so good. It was so good. But apparently I would go running to the chocolate syrup in the refrigerator. I'd take it out of the bottle, and she would say, go get your Bosco. I'd take it out, I'd suck on it, and I'd go into a chocolate sugar coma. So if this were the movies, then at this point, Mom and I would have a big hug and a big cry, and we'd forgive each other, and I would go on and have no problem with chocolate again, right? Because I would have healed the hole in my heart. That would have been the original source. It was the original source, or at least it was iconic for what went on. But my problem got worse. I did forgive my mom. I did forgive myself. I was softer as a result of that. I learned a lot about my mom and myself as a result of that conversation. It was a great conversation to have. But my problem got worse because there was this little voice in my head. And the voice said something like, you know what, Glenn, you're right. Our mama didn't love us enough. And she left a great big chocolate-sized hole in our heart. And until we can fill it with the love of our life, we're going to have to go right on binging. Yippee, let's go get some right now. What I recognized from that, and from seeing what was happening in the substances these companies were engineering, and reading Jack Shrimpy's stuff, was that you can't really love yourself. You can't love yourself out of this. It's more like a rabid animal that you have to capture and cage, or it's more like a challenger for leadership in a wolf pack. If I'm the alpha wolf and there's a challenger for leadership, when there's a challenge for leadership, the alpha wolf doesn't say, oh, somebody needs a hug. The alpha wolf says, get back in line or I'll kill you. You know, you've got your place, I've got my place, this is how this thing works. Or a better analogy might be a bodily organ. We have bodily organs that generate very powerful urges. Our testicles, our ovaries, our bladders, they'll generate very powerful urges, but we don't run around kissing attractive people in the street. We don't, pee in the middle of an interview. We wait until we can express that urge in an appropriate way in an appropriate time, and you can get in a lot of trouble if you don't. Yeah. It's expected in society that we do that. So I started to think of these urges that I was experiencing, where it felt like I needed the chocolate to survive. I started to think of them as nothing more than an attraction I'd feel for a woman, or having to urinate someplace, and I said, this is just one more bodily sensation that I need to dominate the way that I dominate the other ones. Here's the embarrassing part. This is how I got better. I never expected to be talking about it publicly. I just thought it was my own private thing. I really am a sophisticated psychologist. I've done tens of millions of dollars of consulting. This is what I did. I've got a pig inside me. My lizard brain, that's going to be my pig. So I'm going to draw a really clear line in the sand that differentiates healthy from unhealthy eating. So, for example, I will only ever have chocolate on a Saturday or Sunday again. I'll never eat chocolate during the week. If I hear any little voice in my head that suggests that I should have chocolate on a Wednesday, for example, because, gee, Glenn, you've worked out hard enough, you can afford it, or you could start tomorrow, or chocolate comes from a cocoa bean and that grows on a plant, so therefore it's a vegetable. That would be pig squeal. And I would say, I don't want that, my pig does. I don't eat pig slop, the chocolate itself would be pig slop, and I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. So I don't eat pig slop, I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. As ridiculous as that sounds, as crude and primitive as that is, it would wake me up at the moment of impulse and just give me a few extra microseconds to remember who I was, what my plans were, and why I made them. And I wish I could say I always made the right choice right away, but I didn't. What happened right away was that I recognized that I wasn't powerless. I didn't have a disease like Overeaters Anonymous was trying to tell me that I did. I could take control. It wasn't this automatic process. There was not something overtaking my brain. I mean, there was, but I was superior to it. This is me that lives up here, is superior to the lizard brain that lives down here. In evolution, and neurology, we're set up so that we have the ability to modulate any impulse to consider the impact it's going to have on those that we love and our long-term goals. The upper brain can control the lower brain. And I started to make the right decisions. And I kept a journal for 8 years about me versus my pig and all the crazy things that it said and how I learned to recognize and disempower it. I found all the lies in what it was saying. And somewhere around 2014, 2015, I was a minor partner in a publishing company. And the CEO said, we need a book to demonstrate that we know what we're doing so we can get some of these bigger authors to go with us. And I said, well, I wrote this crazy journal. Do you want to look at it? And he says, yes, I want to look at it. And he went ape for it. And he says, can you make this into a book? So I made it into a book, and now it's 600,000 copies later. And I'm this crazy psychologist that has a pig inside of him and doesn't eat pig slop and doesn't let farm animals tell him what to do. So.
All right. So many questions, so many things to
I almost
discuss.
needed a piece of paper.
I know, I was thinking that myself. I've got one sitting over here. I was about to just sneak over and grab it and write some stuff down.
Okay. One of my first questions, way back when you were 17, you mentioned that you said, I recovered from food. So you ate the food, you recovered from food, and you worked out, I think, were the three. So what was recovering from food like for you?
Oh, well, I don't mean that at that point I was recovered from the food addiction. What I meant was that if I would have 2 big giant bowls of pasta, that I'd have to sleep it off and wait for it to pass through my body.
Yeah, no, so, that's right. That's what I was expecting as the answer. Only that, like, we call it a food coma.
Yeah.
And yeah, like Christmas Day when everyone eats way too much and everyone falls asleep in the afternoon. So yeah. That type of thing.
It's really interesting. I mean, we went away camping recently, and there's we went on a beautiful coastal town, and we got fish and chips. And we haven't eaten deep fried sort of food like that in a really long time, and our bodies just aren't used to it. And when we ate it, it was yummy. But I fell asleep on the beach about an hour later because my body couldn't process it properly. And it was such a wake-up call to me to remember and realise that I'm just recovering from what I ate. It'll pass, you know. But it's interesting.
Well, and you also spend an awful lot of time in the bathroom when you're doing that. Yeah. One of my food mentors, who helped me with the diet that I was eating, not with the mental structure, said that I should never have to recover from a meal. And whatever I was eating, if I had to recover from it, there was something wrong, and so I should step back and adjust what I was eating. And I always remembered that mantra, and it really shaped how, once I did have control over food, what I wound up eating, which wound up being largely fruit and vegetables, like organic fruit and vegetables.
Yeah, it's so true, that recovery. I was on a flying recently, and airport food is so amazing. So we
bit of sarcasm there.
A lot of sarcasm there. Anyway, airport food wasn't ideal. I tried to do the best you can, stuck in that situation. But the next day, I was the same. I had what I call an NSG hangover, and it felt awful. I felt hungover, like I had been drinking, and I don't drink, so that clearly wasn't the problem. So, and it was all food related. So I love that, how if you have to recover from food, you shouldn't be eating that food.
And I think it's really interesting as well is I would never have realised that I was recovering. I once would have put it down to the fact that I was sleeping in a camp bed, that I would have been tired, maybe something else had happened, it was hot, I would have made all these other excuses, but at the end of the day, it was just the fish and chips that I ate.
Yeah.
And also we get so used to feeling that way, if we're having meals day in, day out, like if, just like you were back when you were 17 and just eating whatever filled your tummy, you get so used to that, and all of a sudden you become this person of the new normal.
Yeah. People get used to the overstimulation also. We live in a world with hyperstimuli.
Yeah.
There were no chocolate bars on the savannah. There were no, potato chips or Doritos or things like that in the tropics when we're evolving. And our nervous systems actually down-regulate to accommodate that. I remember when I slept underneath the subway for the first couple of weeks, I couldn't sleep. But then your nervous system adjusts and you don't really hear it. The same thing happens with concentrated forms of sweets, for example. If you have a candy bar every day, at the end of 2 or 3 weeks, an apple won't really taste sweet to you anymore. And how many people say they don't like fruit and vegetables anymore? The good news is, if you stop having the candy bar, your taste buds regenerate and your nervous system adjusts again. And before you know it, you can taste the difference between an Envy versus a Fuji versus a Gala apple. And you get the pleasure from what nature had to offer. But your pig will tell you that's not true. Your pig will tell you you're going to miss it forever, you're going to be tortured forever, you have to have chocolate every day or else you're just not going to feel normal. It's not true. Your body readjusts and you find pleasure in other things.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay, you go.
I want to go back to the three scenarios that you mentioned. Now, chocolate was, you mentioned family.
From the study? from the study?
Yep.
Chocolate was eaten by people who had trouble with chocolate tended to be lonely or brokenhearted. People who had trouble with salty, crunchy things like pretzels and chips tended to be stressed at work. And people who had trouble with soft, chewy things like bread and bagels, they tended to have stress at home.
Interesting. Interesting. All right, so let's get into the psychology of it, and this pig that you had. Now, can you dive into that? Because I thought that was really cool how you made that up, and that was where you focused your energy onto it. Now, I had a thought that you set yourself a rule of only eating chocolate on, a Saturday or whatever day suited you. But how do we not binge on that day? So if I say, because, I don't know, let's say potato chips are probably my weakness, which are crisps in America. I know.
Yeah.
And, if I go, I only have them on Saturday, how do I just have like a handful and not the whole bag or a whole block of chocolate or whatever?
Well, first of all, let me say that for many people, none is easier than some. Yeah. And for me with chocolate, I eventually came to the conclusion that I would just never have chocolate again. I haven't had it for years. I'm much happier without it. That said, I think that people are entitled to maximize their freedom. And if people want to take the risk and try it, what I recommend is that you really spell out where the boundaries are. So you could think of an archery target. There's the bullseye, and there's a very clear boundary around the bullseye. But then there's a second rung with a really clear boundary around it also. You need to know what you're aiming for and make some of those decisions beforehand. So maybe it would be, I allow myself to have, 4 ounces of 85% chocolate on a Saturday or Sunday, but not both. And you know exactly where it begins and it ends so that you know when to put it away and when to wait for next time. There are a lot of studies on willpower. We're having trouble replicating some of them, but there are a lot of studies on willpower that suggest that it's a fatigable muscle and there are only so many good decisions that you can make during the course of a day. So if you eliminate the food decisions in the difficult, So if you say, I only have 4 ounces of chocolate on a Saturday or Sunday and it's got to be dark chocolate, then all the other food decisions in the moment have been eliminated. You don't have to rely on willpower to get through it. So a lot of times when people have had trouble in the past, but they haven't been exposed to this concept, and then they create those very clear boundaries and make the decisions beforehand, suddenly they're okay. So that's the answer to how you do it. It doesn't always work, and there are some people that are really addicted. Sugar, flour, and alcohol are the main culprits. Yep. So some people have to get off of those things, at least for a while.
Yeah. It's so interesting. It's sorry.
No, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say, I've got an 18-year-old and I swear she is addicted to sugar. It's pretty much horrendous at the moment. So we're working through that. But
it is addictive at the end of the day.
Addictive.
Just like, other addictive things. I want to talk about... oh, God, now I've gone blank. Hold on, I wanted to say something before. Oh, you keep talking.
Oh, I was just going to say, I had done my talking.
Steve Martin once, you know who Steve Martin is? You know who Steve Martin is. He said that if you forget what you have to say and then someone says, oh, you remember later, then you should say, I'll remember, I'm radioactive. He delivers it better than I do, but it was a funny joke. Would you like the last 15 seconds of your life back? I'm sorry.
I think the psychology behind it all is fascinating. I would personally like to learn a lot more about it, and I think it is really interesting. And
what it comes down to is that character trumps willpower. When I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but when I was making these rules where I would say I will never have chocolate during the week, what I was really saying is I've made a decision to become the kind of person who doesn't eat chocolate on a weekday. So the reason that's different.
Because binge eating is a crisis in Australia, I think, just as much as anywhere else. And obesity and all sorts of things are on the rise. And there is a lot of emotional eating happening. And I've done it myself at times. Like I will be bored, so I'll just eat, or I'll be like, sad
or stressed,
I will eat.
Yeah.
And you don't make the best choices when you're if I don't eat an apple, I can promise you that.
So it's true that when you overload your digestive system with things that don't really belong in there, that the body perceives a bit of an emergency. It diverts blood and resources to getting that through your system, and it loses the ability to conduct the emotions at the same level. So there is a kind of anesthetic effect of food, and that's what people say we're eating for comfort.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another reason that people are eating, and it's really important to switch this paradigm. Because if you believe you're only eating for comfort, then your pig can say, oh my God, I'm hurting so much, and you gotta feed me, you gotta get... And you're very vulnerable to feeding the pig because you're going through this emotion or that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
We also eat to get high with food. The things that we are overeating, we're typically not overeating broccoli. We're typically overeating a bag or a box or a container or some type of industrial food, which is a concentrated form of pleasure that didn't exist as we were evolving. Another name for that is a drug. And so rather than tell yourself that you're eating for comfort, if you tell yourself that you're eating to get high with food, it makes it psychologically dystonic. It makes it uncomfortable, and you're less likely to allow the emotion to result in the binge like you did before.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
It really does. So be kinder to ourselves, be kinder to the way that we talk about things, and talk about things in a positive way rather than a negative way.
Well, this is true too. I tell people to commit with perfection, but forgive yourself with dignity.
Yeah.
So what happens in our culture is people say, well, progress, not perfection.
Yeah.
But when it comes to food, when it comes to these like food drugs, really, sugar, flour, alcohol, chocolate, and people want to regulate them. If you commit with anything less than perfection, you're unlikely to succeed. Because you'll be thinking, maybe I will or maybe I won't, I'll just do the best that I can. And they're so pleasurable that eventually your pig can overwhelm you and say, how about now, how about now, how about now?
Yeah.
But when someone is setting out to win, like when an Olympic archer is shooting at the bullseye, they pull the arrow back and they visualize the arrow going into the target before they let it go.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not thinking, maybe I'll hit it or maybe I won't. If they're a really good archer, it's a foregone conclusion. And that allows them to purge their mind of the doubt and distraction. If they miss the target, they don't say, gee, I might as well shoot the rest of the arrows up in the air because I'm a pathetic archer. They get up and they shoot at the target again after analyzing what went wrong.
Yeah.
It turns out that we need to feel a little bit of pain, just a little bit of guilt and shame if we make a mistake. Otherwise, we don't pay attention. But just like touching a hot stove, you don't put your whole hand on the hot stove and say, well, forget it, I'm just a pathetic hot stove toucher. You figure out, how did you miss the hot stove and how are you going to avoid it in the future? How did you hit it and how are you going to avoid it in the future? And then you let it go. Then there's no purpose to feeling guilt and shame any longer. If you don't have physical pain, there are disorders where people can't feel physical pain, and those people don't usually live past 5 years old. So you need a little bit of it, but the perseveration, when it gets stuck in your head, when you're saying, oh my God, I'm pathetic, I'm awful, that's really your pig talking to you. It's trying to beat you down and make you feel too weak to resist the next binge. See, the excessive guilt and shame is actually binge motivated in and of itself. So you want to commit with perfection and forgive yourself with dignity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much.
I do remember what I was going to ask.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I do. It was about, we'll talk about it briefly because we're nearly out of time, but it was about that enhancers. So the flavor enhancers, and you mentioned before about those enhancing properties that are in food that are also one of the reasons why it's so heavily linked to addiction as well. So
that's a rhetorical statement. I'm not sure what else I could say about that, but it's true.
Well, I suppose. That's exactly right. But I'm glad that you mentioned it, and I'm glad that you spoke about that as well, because, you know, it's not all our fault either. Like, it's so much of it is being made up to be what we eat and what is in it.
Oh, no, I think we need to turn shame into anger. I think we should all be very angry at we live in a democratic society, and Winston Churchill said the democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. But democracy doesn't really take care of these capitalistic concerns that could be very bad for our health. So it's up to us to really police it and make rules for ourselves and decide what's healthy and what's not. And I think, you know, to your point, we need to be able to step out of that overstimulation. We don't need to be. What's your dog's name?
Lacey.
Lacey. Come here, Lacey. Come here.
Listeners at home.
Oh, we got to see her now.
Staying in the back.
Being very naughty.
We've got lots of listeners with dogs. That's all good.
So we need to step out of the stimulation. We have
very naughty.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We have had an absolute ball. Like, we've learned a lot. I'm really looking forward to re-listening to this myself and hearing all those little nuggets of gold that you mentioned at the start. So thank you so much for being on our show. Now, where can people find you?
Oh, so I wrote a book called Never Binge Again, which is frequently the #1 book on the Kindle free side for weight loss and weight management. And I can get you a free copy if you go to neverbingeagain.com and click the big red button and sign up for the free reader bonuses. You'll get not only a free electronic copy of the book if you want one, but a set of food plan starter templates. So these are sets of rules that match just about any dietary philosophy, whether it's high carb or low carb or ketogenic or vegan or point counting or calorie counting. It's all there. And I recorded a whole bunch of sessions with people for free so that you could hear how this works in practice, because I know this is really weird. I know you've got this psychologist on your show who's talking about a pig inside of them, and people must be thinking, what the hell are these ladies up to? But I promise you it's a really compassionate, effective process that restores people's hope and power and enthusiasm, and I wanted you to hear that. It's all at Never Binge Again. Click the big red button.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
We'll put that all in our show notes as well, so people can find you too from there.
Okay.
Well, once again, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here.